Hey guys, it's John here at Citrix. I'm a technology evangelist, developer advocate, and wanted to do a little bit of an impromptu kind of live coding session to show you how, or to show off how we can build a C#.NET based application and tie it into Octoblu, specifically using the meshblu API to register the application as a device within the Octoblu infrastructure, and then build a workflow that shows us how to actually send messages from the workflow back to the local application that's running here on the workstation. So with that, let's get started. We're just going to create a new project here. And we're actually gonna, you can see that there's a Citrix node and an Octoblu. You get this by installing the Citrix Developer Extension for Visual Studio. We'll put a link in the video so you can go grab it. But specifically for this kind of live coding session, we're gonna choose the Octoblu node, and then we're gonna say use the sample that subscribes to a meshblu device and then receive messages. We're gonna just keep our standard new project name here, and we'll do OK. Now, while this is creating the project template, how this works is we're going to use the Octoblu HTTP API to register the application to the Octoblu network, and then we're going to use WebSockets to actually register for events for this particular device and wait for those message events to come in. So how do we do that, right? So we can show you the form here real quick. We basically just have a button that registers with Octoblu. We get the UUID and come back, which we're going to need for subsequent stuff on the workflow side. We'll show you that, and then a couple classes here. We'll go through this in detail in a little bit, but I'll just show you the application in a running state, and we'll go from there. So if we actually run the application here, so we have the application running. We're going to register this app with meshblu. Now, basically what's happening is we've made a call to the Octoblu HTTP endpoint and said we want to register this device. We get back a UUID and a token, which we're going to need when we actually build the workflows. And we just have a little bit of dialogue here that says, hey, do you want to save this token information for later use? We'll say yes here, and it just stores it in a property bag for the application. So we'll say yes. So that is, and then we are actually subscribing now using WebSockets to the meshblu API to receive messages for this particular device that's in the network. So we'll jump into the code here in a little bit, but I kind of want to show you the end-to-end scenario first. So we're going to jump over to Octoblu, and we'll put a link here if you want to play around and register with Octoblu. But for now, we'll assume that you have actually an Octoblu account. So from here, we're actually going to create a new workflow. And we're going to call it, you can just select here, we're going to call it live coding session. Okay, so now we have a workflow in Octoblu, so now we actually have to build it using the Octoblu nodes. These are basically objects that you can drag into a flow to do stuff. So the first thing we're going to need is a trigger. You got to click on Tools here and Trigger. You just click on that, and that's a trigger. This is the thing that actually executes the workflow. So that's the first one. The next one we're going to need is a compose node. Now what this does here is this is going to allow us to set a message that we want to send back over to the application that's listening for messages. So we'll just link these two up. We're going to click on the compose node here, and we have to add a key and a value pair. So this is a standard key value data store. So in here, we're going to say the value is this is some data from Octoblu. And then the key here, now this is a special key, it's actually going to be called payload. And I'll explain this in a little bit, but for now, let's just keep it at payload. And then here's our value that we're going to send back to the application. So the next object we want to add is a meshblu device. Okay. So what this does here is this is a reference to any device that has been registered into the meshblu network. And how it knows that is it uses a UUID. So when you drag this onto the surface, it's going to generate a unique ID for you. But instead of using that generator one, we're going to use this UUID that our application actually generated. So we're going to copy that UUID and we're going to paste it here into the meshblu node. So now this is a reference to our application that's been registered with the meshblu network. Okay, so we'll link those two up. And then the last one we're going to add here is this broadcast node. Now what this does is this is going to broadcast any messages of the payload key out to this meshblu device here. So in our case, when we run it, you're going to see that our application here is going to receive some JSON data back that's going to say this is a test from Octoblu. Okay, so basically we have a trigger. That's how we execute the workflow. We have a compose node, which is basically how we can define some data. In this case, it's a value and a key value pair. Then we have the meshblu device, which is a representation of any device that's registered in the meshblu network based on the UUID. And then our broadcast node. And the broadcast node basically is exactly what it says. It broadcasts the payload out to any devices that are in the workflow. Now you can have multiple meshblu devices in here, but that's for a later, maybe a later coding session. Okay. So that's our basic workflow and our basic application that's running here. So this application here is running and listening for, it's subscribed to messages for this device, and it's in a ready state, and it's kind of listening for messages to come in. It's using WebSockets to listen, right? So we'll kind of show you how that works. So we'll actually just say start here, and we'll wait for the workflow to start up. And once this starts up, we'll actually jump into the code here, and we'll just walk through and show you some of the stuff that we have for registering the device, and then how we're actually looking for the WebSocket receive messages. Okay, so our workflow is started here. That's great. What we're going to do is we're actually going to hit this little play button. That's going to trigger the workflow. Now you can see we ran. And as you can see over here in the .NET form, you can see that we actually got a message received event, and we have some JSON data. The first one is the devices node. This is basically the UUID that sent the data back to us. Okay, so this is the device that's registered, and you can see here, here's the payload that we define in our compose node. And then this is the data that it actually got sent. So you can see here that we're actually registered now in the meshblu network, and we can actually have a workflow that sends data back to our registered application. Kind of cool. And then we also have another object here. It's from UUID. This is the actual workflow ID. So every workflow that you create in Octoblu has a UUID, and this tells us here's the UUID that we're getting the message from. So that's in general how you can hook up an application to the meshblu network and then build a workflow around it and send messages back to the application. So if we want to do something interesting, we can go back here into this compose node, and we can say some more data, and then we'll restart this workflow here real quick. It's always a good idea to stop it and restart it when you make changes to the workflow. So it's going to stop it and then restart it. And then if we execute the workflow again, you can see that we actually got another message received with the data, and our payload here is some more data. So you can see that we're actually connected. We're connected to the application via the workflow, and we're sending messages back and forth. Okay, so that's in general how we kind of a basic overview of how you can use some of the samples that we have in the extension, build an application, and then register it and use it from within Octoblu. So that's kind of the overview of it. So now let's jump into some of the interesting stuff and look at some of the code. So we register, or we set up a couple of variables here. The first one is our WebSocket address, which is meshblu.octoblu.com. So that's our WebSocket address. That's what we're going to use to get the socket information. Our standard HTTP endpoint for the HTTP API is https://meshblu.octoblu.com, and then we have a custom class for the device info that we built here, and that's here. So this is basically the information that's going to come back when we register the device, and it's going to pass us all the information. Really, the two that we care about for this example are UUID and token, right? Because that's what we're going to use to actually register, or we're going to use to subscribe to the messages. Okay, so let's kind of dive into what happens when we actually click this register app button. So we're using just the basic .NET HTTP client objects, right? So we're going to set the base address to our meshblu address. This is our HTTP endpoint. We set so this is going to be the body of the post here that we send to Octoblu to register the device, and we're just telling it the type of this registered device is going to be application device. This can be anything you want, and it helps when you want to query the API to say, give me all of my devices of type X. And so this is you can make this whatever you want. For the sample, we set it to application_device. This is going to be sent via the post request. And then here we're actually doing the post, as you can see, right? So we're doing the post async. We're calling the devices endpoint, and we're sending this body content along with it. And so for here, we're just doing standard REST-based calls, right? So back in the status code, if it's a 201 or created, we're going to read the content of the response. We're just checking if it's not null. Then what we're going to do is we're going to deserialize that content and into this plain old CLR object, right? This is the static typed object that we can deserialize it to. And then we just set our text box text to the UUID and token that we got back. And then from there, we're just doing some, if you'd like to save the UUID and token, we save it back into the application configuration file. So that's basically how we call the Octoblu HTTP endpoint to register a device. So that's how we get our UUID and token that we're going to use when we actually want to subscribe to the messages. So now let's kind of talk about how we actually set up our message listener and how we tell Octoblu that we actually want to listen. So we're actually using a NuGet package here called socket.io client.net. You can get that in NuGet. And it's basically Node.js like socket.io object or .NET class. So here we're actually creating a new IO socket for our meshblu WebSocket addresses. This is the WSS:// meshblu.octoblu.com, and we're actually setting it to we want to use port 443. Okay, So then we're actually subscribing to the connect event here. So we're saying, you know, on connect, we want to run this event. Here's just some console logging. This is the message you see in this text box here. So we're just calling out, hey, we're trying to connect to meshblu. So this is just some status messages to let the user know what's happening. And then we're subscribing to the identify event. Once this this event triggers, we again set some information to the text box to let the user know what's going on, and we actually are setting a settings object that we're going to send to the identity method, right? So here we're actually saying, okay, we're setting up some JSON data. The UUID is going to be equal to the UUID we got back from meshblu. Socket ID is equal to data.socket ID, and the token is going to be equal to the token that we got back from the meshblu, and we're going to send that to the identity method in meshblu. So then we have our ready event. So on a ready event, we're going to get some data back. We're going to check it and see if the status is 201 or created. If it is, meaning we've authenticated and the object is in a valid state, and we're actually going to subscribe. We want to subscribe to that UUID and wait for some messages. Okay, so that's what we do here. We actually set a new settings object. We're going to set the UUID and token again, and then we're going to pass that into the subscribe method for Socket.io. And we're basically saying we're going to want to subscribe to messages, and here's the UUID and token that we're looking for. So any messages that go to that UUID and token from meshblu/Octoblu will come here. So here we do a not ready event. We just tell the user that something happened and we can't recover from it. So then here is the kind of meat of after all that plumbing setup, here's really the meat of the call. And it's basically saying we want to subscribe to the message endpoint, and we're going to receive some data back. Now, when in Octoblu, when this broadcast happens, it's going to send it to the messages endpoint. That's basically what we're saying. Subscribe to the messages endpoint, and then whenever you get information in, we're going to do something. So in this example, we're basically just writing out the data that we get into the text box. And you can see here we're saying message received and the data, and then the data that we get in from the object. In our case, it is the data that we're getting back is going to be this, along with, as you remember, along with the from UUID and the device UUID. So you're going to get those two things that come in the payload. And you could create a CLR object, or you could create a class and deserialize that into the class if you so choose. That could be JSON data that comes back. There could be a bunch of different things that actually come back with that data. So here is basically where you would interact on that data, or act on that data to say, I want to do something, whether it's, you know, make a call to an Active Directory or act on the data in some way. And that's basically it for the sample. So it's not a complex sample at all, but it kind of shows what you can do by registering an application into the meshblu network, and then building a workflow around that device and being able to do something. So with that, I think that's kind of this quick live coding session on using the sample that we have in the developer extension. If you guys are interested, go ahead and check out Octoblu. If you go to octoblu.com, we'll put some links in the video that gets posted up here. So you can go to octoblu.com and register there. You can sign up with Twitter, Google Plus, or create your own account. So do that, check it out, write some workflows, let us know what you got. Let us know what you build, that'd be very cool. And then also check out developer.citrix.com. This is kind of the one-stop shop for all things developer related in the Citrix world. So check this out. Here's our link to our Citrix Developer Extension for Visual Studio. This is where you can get those samples that I showed in the new project wizard. So definitely go ahead and get this and download this and get started. And let us know what you guys think. If you guys have any questions or you have any feedback, we're going to do more of these kind of live coding sessions as we get more samples. Email me or ping me on Twitter at John McBride. Reply to the comment in the video post, or ping me on Google+. So we love to hear what you guys have. We love to hear what you guys think. Let us know what other samples you need. Let us know what you guys build with Octoblu. And we appreciate your time. Thanks, guys.